Kia ora, good morning. Welcome to Connecting the Dots podcast. So, as promised, from yesterday's podcast and from my community box, today we're going to talk about the Watcher, the case of the Watcher. This is actually going to be a quick podcast because I think there's not really a lot to go into as far as who I think is responsible. But I didn't want to do this podcast until I was absolutely 100% sure that I was on the right track. So, watching the mysterious unsolves, yada yada, the story, same old, same old. And this one turned up, and, it's intriguing. These sort of things intrigue me. And when I was a little girl, my dad always used to say to me when we were working on these investigations, and because you have to understand, I grew up with horror movies as well. My father loved horror movies. And we were the first people in our neighbourhood, in the small town of Levin that I grew up in New Zealand, we were the first people in our neighbourhood to get a video recorder. Our friends used to flock to our house. People used to come to our house because we had a video recorder. Back in those days you couldn't record. But it wasn't too long after that you could. But then we got our video stores started popping up, Blockbuster and all that, and even right up until the 90s, we were watching videos and that before DVDs became a thing and became affordable. And I grew up watching horror movies. He used to let my sister and I watch horror movies because he knew that this sort of stuff fascinated me. And so I grew up watching movies like, Friday the 13th and The Burning and Halloween and Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And, it fascinated me that the Texas Chainsaw Massacre was based on a true story. And working on the Ed Gein thing with my dad, and I even got to go to Wisconsin. I never got taken to where the farm was, but I had always said to my boys, when we start making our shows again, we are going to go to Wisconsin and we're going to go to the Ed Gein farm, and take the biorhythmic field generator and do what I've got to do to help those poor victims, and the effects that their horrendous deaths and that had on the land there. But I didn't realise that I was only where I was staying. I was only a few miles away from the Ed Gein property, as well as in the same county, in the same state as Jeffrey Dahmer. So I have always said to my boys, we're going to go back there and we're going to do what we have to do, with the biorhythmic field generator and that, because I had grown up with my dad introducing horror movies to me. Horror movies and martial arts movies. Like, I love martial arts films. I'm a big fan of Sho Kosugi and Jackie Chan and Bruce Lee and John Saxon and all of that, because my dad, it was how I bonded with my dad. And when working on these investigations with him and when trying to solve, who the killer was in the movies, the one thing my dad used to say to me was, when you're looking to solve these cases, the one thing you need to ask yourself is, who has the most to gain from the outcome of these murders or from the outcome of this crime? And when I was listening to, the Watcher video, I started doing some investigating, and I just kept hearing my dad saying, who has the most to gain from this? And I immediately saw, in my mind's eye, like a middle-aged woman. I could see her with her short brown hair, sort of slightly plumpish, and someone who thinks very highly of herself within her community. And then I later found out during my investigations that when the police did DNA testing of the envelopes that were sent, the DNA came back as a woman in her 50s or 60s and probably lived locally to the area. So then I knew I was on the right track. So I sat with it for a bit, and I've been going over it and over it. And I just keep saying to myself, who has the most to gain from doing what they did to the Brodus family? Derek and Marie Brodus, they bought the property in June 2014 for, some reports say 1.3 million, some reports say 1.4 million. And they ended up selling it for, quite a bit less than what they paid for it, having never had the experience of living in the home, because they were scared out of it. Now, I don't know whether this is a line of inquiry that the police have gone down, but it does seem a little bit obvious to me. And I don't know that other people have picked up on this, but, running along that thread of who has the most to gain from this, when you look at some of the things that were put in the letter, this is obviously somebody who considers herself to be an authority and someone who is quite important. Now, who would have access to the knowledge of that family, who was living in the house, the ages of, the children, the nicknames, that sort of thing? And there's only two possibilities. As well as the fact that in one of the letters, they refer to the neighbourhood as my neighbourhood, and then they said that they saved the soul of 657 Boulevard because of my orders, like they listened to my orders. So in conclusion, basically, you have to look at somebody, I really think you have to look at somebody who either works for the district council, someone who works on the council, because they would have access to all those kind of records, or somebody who worked in real estate, especially if their father and grandfather also worked on the council. And I know in a lot of these towns and that, these things are passed down from generation to generation. If you have someone who was a councilman in the 60s, chances are their son or daughter is going to be a councilman, and then or councilwoman, and the grandchildren and that, because it comes with a certain level of prestige. It comes with a high level of honour, because you're an elected official. It means people trust you, and it means that if you come up against people that have offended you, maybe you bought the property from them, or you sold the property to them and they were rude, and you felt like you were if you have a slightly inflated ego and sense of self-importance, and these people come along and buy a house from you where they just treat you like a real estate agent in a town where they're used to being treated like a mild celebrity or someone with power and influence, maybe they took offence to that. Or, if they had talked, because the thing is, remember, this family started doing renovations on the property, and it's a 105-year-old property at the time. It'd be like 115, almost 120-year-old property now. And doing my maths, 115, it was either a 105-year-old property or 115-year-old property at the time. I think it was 105. So it would be like almost 115 years old now. Trying to do the maths almost. Anyway, that's inconsequential, but it's considered obviously a well-loved historical home. So an estate agent who grew up in the neighbourhood, loving the aesthetics of this beautiful neighbourhood where the houses were worth a lot of money, where they were architecturally stunning and gorgeous and perfect, that kind of home in that area is like my dream home. When we move to Canada, I'm going to try and find a house with that same sort of character. I love older homes. That kind of design of the houses of that kind of neighbourhood, that's my dream home. And like, these are the sort of neighbourhoods that you can take pride in, because they're architecturally just stunning and perfect, with their wooden floors, and like just perfect in my opinion. Just, those classical American style houses, and that they're just architecturally just stunning and perfect to me. And obviously the people in that area take pride in their houses because of the age and the history, and the stunning architecture, the historical architecture. And so this family have come along, and thrown money at this house, and then they want to, change it, would be offensive to somebody whose family has taken pride in looking after the neighbourhood and protecting the neighbourhood. And so, and then of course when they decided they weren't going to move into it but split it into 2 apartments, that offended not just this person but everybody else in the neighbourhood, because then, it devalues the property prices. And I just think that this woman took great offence to the fact that this family seemed a bit arrogant and conceited. There was a lot of anger there and a lot of resentment, maybe even a little bit of jealousy that, everybody else in the neighbourhood might be sort of slightly older, more mature, and this couple were coming in with young children. I know in the past I've experienced the same thing when my ex-husband and I moved to Ilkeston. We moved into an area that was for more slightly affluent middle-aged people, and here we were in our early 30s, living in this really lovely Ilkeston village. And I think we had a lot of issues with some of our neighbours and that taking offence to us living there. And I even got into a couple of altercations with our next door neighbour because I, I, I love animals, as you know. Like I'm a guardian for animals because I'm an Indigenous woman, and we are guardians to earth and animals. And I started feeding hedgehogs. I even do it now. I leave food out for the hedgehogs. I feed the stray cats so that they don't go after the birds, and I feed the birds and all that sort of thing. And I feed the hedgehogs, and hedgehogs are protected here in the United Kingdom, and there's laws protecting the hedgehogs here. And where we were living in West Hallam in Ilkeston in Derbyshire, I was feeding a lot of hedgehogs, and they had made nests, and like I'd made like little homes in that for like the voles and for bees and insects to go into. I had like a heap where we used to put like all our wood, like all the wood from the chopped down trees and branches and the cut grass and that. Like we had it in the corner with a compost bin. And I used to put like my potato peelings out there, and my vegetable scraps and fruit scraps and that for all the wildlife. And I even at one point had a pheasant in my backyard because like the animals just come to me and I look after them. And our next door neighbours had decided to chop their fence down, which was our fence as well, but they hadn't told us. And instead of just like removing the fence, they kicked it down on our side of the property, and it landed right where the hedgehogs were living. And I went absolutely ballistic, and they were going on about our how half of our garden was all unkept of that, and I put her in her place, her and her workers. Because I said to her workers, "You've just pushed the fence down on our side of the property where the hedgehogs are living." And I said they're a protected species here, and if you've done anything to hurt these hedgehogs, I'm going to call the police. I'm going to call animal protection, because they're a protected species here and that. And admittingly, the workers were really apologetic, and like the woman just was like, "Doh," and just went off in a big fat stormy puff. But her husband did apologise, because he actually sold my ex-husband our car, and he did apologise, and the workers were very apologetic, and they moved the fence and that so I could check. Luckily, Amber and Golden were fine. I named them Amber and Golden, and then there was a little baby called Charlie, and they were fine. So that was all good. But she treated me and my ex with the same disdain, and spoke to us the same way that this woman was treating the Brodus family in those letters, there was utter contempt there and jealousy. This our neighbour, walked around with all the pomp and ceremony of somebody that you thought was like the mayor's wife or something, and she just did not like the fact that a young couple were able to live in the same neighbourhood as her, and she took offence to it. And then because everything in her garden and house and with her body was immaculate, and I had the slightly overgrown bit to protect the wildlife. um I mean, I even had an incident where I had starlings nesting in the drain pipe, and I heard a commotion one day and saw a falcon trying to get to the babies in the starlings nest and trying to attack the mum, and I went out and protected the starlings. And then a few weeks later, the birds fell down the drain pipe down the back of my pantry, and I had to I had got the landlord's permission to make a hole to get the starlings out of the bit they'd fallen down, to put them back in the nest, and then put like a to make sure, like a shelf, to make sure that they didn't fall down again. My landlord was really cool like that. Like, he was really up for me doing that sort of thing with the animals. And yeah, so it's very reminiscent of that experience that I had with my neighbour. And so I think that you need to look at somebody who is from a long line of estate agents in the area, or people who have worked on the council, because they're the two professions who would have access to those kind of public records. And especially as well, the estate agent would have been around the family when they were viewing the property, and when they were applying for permits and that sort of thing. They would have heard the parents referring to these kids by their nicknames. Because like I only refer to my sons Thomas and Gabriel as Thomas and Gabriel when I'm referring to them in the third person, like on my social media. But at home, I call them Bubba. I'll say, Bubba, can you ask your brother, blah blah blah, or yeah, I call my boys are called Bubba, or my youngest, I call him Schmoopy, my Schmoopy do. So so it's not hard to have access to that sort of information if you've been around the family at the time you were selling them the property, or when they were having to fill out registration forms and that sort of thing at your local council, or your DVLA, or I don't know if the kids were being registered at their local schools and that. But it is definitely somebody that works either in a government position, more likely council, because nobody at a school would have that kind of authority to tell people to shut it down, if the family were asking for permission to turn the house into two apartments. So it had to be someone whose family name or whose position within the community is respected and is one of authority. So that's why I think real estate and council, because they are also the two kind of professions where if your dad was an estate agent, one of the kids is bound to be an estate agent too. Or if your dad or granddad was on the council, um, you and your grandkid would be too. Like how if your dad was an actor, chances are one of his kids is going to want to be an actor too. If you know what I mean. So that's the line of inquiry I think you need to go down as to who the watcher is. Now, the people who moved in afterwards received a letter as well, but it was welcoming. Like, it wasn't the people who left the property, who sold the property to the Brodus family, got sent a letter basically thanking them for looking after the house. So obviously, because they'd never done any renovations, they kept it as it was. And the people that moved in after got a welcome letter, and they've not had any problems because they've not wanted to change the house either. It was only the Brodus family, because from what I've been able to see, nobody else wanted to do damage to the property the way that the Brodus family did. And so that's why I really think, because when you look at people who work on the council and work for, the state or county governments and that, on, council positions, and that these are the sort of people that are proud of their county and their state and their town's history. They want to become councilmen and councilwomen and that in order to be able to preserve the things that they love about that town, and I totally get that. So not saying that what she did was right, but I think she kind of got off on the fear factor, instilling the fear of God into them, using psychological warfare to do it, and it worked perfectly. Nobody was hurt, and I don't ever think she intended on hurting anyone. I think the fear of the threat was enough to freak this family out, knowing how much they loved their kids and wanted to protect their kids. I think that was enough to get them out, and it worked perfectly. So then, she's been able to kind of puff up her feathers and put her chest out and her head up and strut along the town, and take credit for the fact that she got rid of these people that she did not want in her town. So I'm just putting that out there. I'll put links in the description box below. The screenshot that I've taken for the heading, for the visual for the podcast, for this podcast, is a copy, as one of the letters that it was sent. You can clearly see that this person has written with the wrong hand. So if they're left-handed, they've written with their right hand. If they're right-handed, they've written with their left hand to disguise their handwriting. You can tell this because of the fact that they've made a couple of mistakes when trying to write out the envelope, because they're not used to writing with the wrong hand in order to disguise their handwriting, which means this is somebody whose handwriting would be known to the community, and real estate agents and people who work on the council, their handwriting is very obvious. If they have to sign a lot of things, if they have to write a lot of things, which councillors and people working for the estate agent, because they have to fill out forms and send copies to papered copies to the buyers and all that sort of thing. So this is somebody who went out of their way to disguise their handwriting by writing with the wrong hand, and the fact that they've made those mistakes on the envelope, proves that. And because you can tell by the messy writing that this is somebody who was disguising their handwriting, because their handwriting is obviously easily identifiable within their job, within their profession, within their town, within their community. So these are the lines of inquiry that I think you would need to go down if you want to. It's still considered an active investigation. It's inactive, but the case hasn't been closed. Obviously, if there's more evidence, they would reopen it. So I just think that you need to go down that line of inquiry. And so until next time, have a beautiful day, hold your head up, know you are loved, and I'll speak to you next time. Ka kite anō. Mwah.